On our first topic, we're actually going to be talking how the EMS business is preparing for and mitigating risks such as supply chain disruptions, natural disasters, and economic fluctuations, and how are the manufacturers adapting their processes to handle smaller orders in the face of market uncertainty. Mitch, we invite you to share your comments on that, please.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Jim. And thanks for having me on this webinar and for hosting it. It's much appreciated. Yeah, our industry today is certainly facing various challenges stemming from global conditions. The one that you mentioned is supply chain disruptions. And, the result of that is that our customers are running inventory levels that are leaner than ever before. And this is really increasing their focus on automating material control. For example, using software-based solutions, including machine communication to keep track of the exact location and consumption and remaining quantity of components, while at the same time deploying process control and complete traceability to make sure you have the right material at the right place at the right time, and to ensure raw materials are assigned and used correctly and most importantly not wasted. You mentioned smaller work orders. When running smaller work orders, you end up with a larger number of partially depleted reels within the factory. A reel might come off the line, it's only half empty, and go back into some sort of storage location, for example. So this really only adds to really the importance of tracking the location and remaining quantity for every reel on the shop floor, and also in all of your storage locations. So material control is something we're seeing a lot of. Just to quickly close on, global instability in general, this is driving more emphasis towards centralized monitoring of global operations. Years ago, our customers would be happy if they could monitor, display, and analyze some key performance indicators such as OEE within their factory. Nowadays, we're seeing more and more companies streaming the KPI data from each factory to some centralized monitoring center, where the performance of multiple factories across the globe can be monitored and compared, within the same dashboard. And last point I'll make on this is that displaying the data is no longer enough. The data has to trigger actions whenever a problem or an opportunity for improvement is detected or predicted by your analytics software.
On the next item that we'd like to discuss real quick, and obviously get some feedback on, is how we're leveraging on emerging technologies, digitalization to improve our processes and increase our competitive advantages. How can we adapt to the changing market trends and consumer demands while fostering innovation and creativity within our organizations? Let's start out with you, Mitch, please.
Yeah, sure. And when you were conveying that question, the first term that kind of popped in my head was IIoT. Yeah. And, it's obviously something that everyone's talking about. And IoT is all about connectivity and sharing data between your different systems that on a factory floor, especially in SMT, would otherwise be, disparate and autonomous. I mean, different vendors are best in class at different types of things like screen printing and pick and place and AOI and reflow and ICT. And, there's different companies that provide these machines using different data formats and managing data all in a different way. So connecting and to all these different types of systems, as well as other data sources such as sensors on the shop floor, and harvesting information from all these different sources is really the first step towards any sort of factory digitalization type of initiative. And once you've collected the data, of course, the next challenge is how do you leverage it? You mentioned emerging technologies, and we were all at the Apex trade show in San Diego a couple months ago, and everybody was talking about artificial intelligence and machine learning. Mm-hmm. And these are emerging technologies that are really maturing at an alarming rate. And this rate of maturation is really fueled largely by the cloud service providers. Companies like Google and Amazon, for example, are really pushing AI into the mainstream of many industries, and our industry is no exception. And something like AI really does introduce many new opportunities for electronics manufacturers. And something we're focusing on at Codgescan is kind of evolving from a reactive type of analytics approach to a more of a predictive analytics approach, using these types of technologies. If you look back a few years, a traditional dashboard in our industry would just kind of show you how you're doing, relative to a set threshold or maybe based on statistical process control models. But with AI, we're migrating more to a predictive analytic. And by predictive, I mean being notified about a problem or maybe an anomaly in your operation that you might not otherwise be able to detect. And in many cases, ideally, we want to get to the point where we're notifying you before the problem even happens. One use case example that I think probably a lot of us could relate to would be the test pins on an ICT machine. Everybody who runs ICT has nightmares about test pins either wearing out or bending or breaking, and this jeopardizes the robustness of your test regime, and it also causes downtime and bottlenecks on your line when you have to maintain your test fixtures. And we all have our nightmare stories about that. Well, before a test pin breaks or gets too damaged, it starts to exhibit some erratic measurement behavior. Right. And this is something that an AI algorithm can actually learn and model. So this is a simple example where you could actually train an algorithm to predict in advance which pin on your test fixture is going to need to be replaced next, so that you can schedule that preventive maintenance when the fixture is not being used and avoid downtime on your line, and also increase the robustness of your test operation. So that's one simple example, but it's very relatable to our industry, I think.
Excellent, Mitch. Thank you very much for that. Yeah, Mitch, I've got one for you. What are some of the considerations for EMS when it comes to nearshoring and reshoring in the context of a resilient supply chain? And how is digitalization playing a role in manufacturing, particularly in terms of manufacturing analytics and sustainability efforts?
Sure. I'm glad you mentioned reshoring, because I think this is an exciting trend specifically for our customers in Mexico. From what I'm seeing, our customers' operations in Mexico are amongst the most popular destination for this reshoring trend. And I think that kind of makes sense when you look at the geographic location, the business climate, and the workforce that Mexico has to offer. So it's an exciting time to be working in our industry in Mexico specifically. Resiliency of a supply chain. From our customers' perspective, I mean, there's some things that they can't control, some things that they can control. And what they can control, I think, in a lot of senses, is the quality of data that drives your purchasing and your shipping of raw materials as well as finished goods. And as Mike mentioned, as well as Chris, this is largely, this is data that, has to get to the ERP or MRP system, because that's actually what they use to manage their supply chain. Traditionally, the inventory data in an ERP system would be updated, for your raw materials in your factory anyways, would be updated based on, typically the historical or traditional method of doing it was to do some sort of theoretical backflush. By theoretical, I mean, the quantities of raw materials that should have been consumed for a given work order. Perhaps you have some arbitrary scrap factor or some percentage thrown in, but it's not extremely precise. And of course, I was talking earlier about how everyone's running with a leaner inventory than ever before. So if you're off by a bit, you could run into a shortage quite easily, and lines could be down, and commitments to your customers could be missed. So, with digitalization and I 4.0, Mike mentioned CFX, where, the data coming from these machines is richer and more accurate than ever before. We're able to, really accurately track not only the pick and place events, but on any scrap or mispicks or not placed components, so that the waste is actually accounted for in the data we're able to harvest from the machines. Now, on the topic of CFX, of course, that's a great way to get the data from the machine. Of course, ERP systems don't know what CFX is, because ERP systems are not designed specifically for SMT. So you need some sort of system integrator or some software package that knows the ERP world, but also has domain expertise in SMT. So the software providers that cater to the electronics manufacturing industry are used to make that connection between the lines and the ERP system. And once we get that accurate data into the ERP, then our customers are able to increase the resiliency of their supply chain by more precisely procuring materials, avoiding shortages, and just as importantly, avoid buying too much, right? You don't want to have excess inventory on your hands now. So you're really hitting with the screen printer example is a perfect example where something like AI can really come into play, right? Because if we can correlate, say, how long the paste has been out from the freezer or how long the paste has been open to what your actual temperature and humidity is inside the machine, and compare that to SPI test results, this is a perfect opportunity where, like me as a human being, I can't keep track of how long the paste has been out and what the humidity is and whether my yield is going up and down in my brain. I can't. It's too many different variables. But for AI, you can train an algorithm to say, okay, I want you to model, what happens at my SPI machine when the humidity is 5 degrees or 5 percentage points higher, and my paste happens to be out for 20 minutes longer than normal. And then that way the algorithm can come in and get back to that, predictive sort of analytics, that we were talking about and that Ramiro mentioned about, having the system dictate what you need to do even before you have a problem and optimize things that way. So that's a really good point. I mean, typically when I think of it, I always talk about components a lot, but the consumables, that's a whole other area where those are just as important as the components themselves, for sure.
Mitch DeCaire, quick 15-second closure on your side.
Yeah, sure. I think a lot of the things that my fellow panelists mentioned are synergistic with a lot of my thoughts on these topics. And it really, I think collaboration. When you talk about Industry 4.0, I don't think collaboration and having your different suppliers collaborating together is also a very important thing to think about. No one can go off and in a silo, whether it be Kajascan or Europlace or anyone else, in a silo and create the smart factory. You want to work with people that are going to cooperate with each other with the end user customers' best interests in mind. And that's how we can move forward with the connected factory of the future, is by all collaborating together. And I think this event, with a customer involved, having Flex join us, of course, is great. It shows that the cooperation between different companies is really going to be key and to driving our industry forward and build a better world through smarter manufacturing in the end.
Mitch, I like that statement you made, the collaboration. I think that is very key, okay? Yeah. Between provider and user, okay? It's got to be there. If it's not there.
And the providers together, working together to make the end user more successful. Yeah.
Mitch, I think that's more in your area.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, we were talking a bit about CFX, which is the current, IPC standard, the emerging one. There's a lot of advantages to it, but we've been having to do traceability and inventory tracking for the past 20 some years. So we've developed a library of machine adapters for all the leading equipment vendors, and so we've been kind of forced by doing projects in traceability and material management to interface with even the oldest of machines. In some cases, I mean, if the operating system is, pre Windows, then we may have to sometimes no quote things. But for the most part, I mean, anything within the last 15, 20 years, we can get some data from. It may not be as rich as the CFX data that Mike referred to, but for basic inventory tracking and things like that, we can often access the data. We would, of course, need to look at your specific machine set to determine if it's possible. There's also other solutions we can provide, like, if your machine doesn't have its own setup validation or traceability options, then we have modules that are machine and machine vendor agnostic, which wouldn't be as elegant per se as the latest Europlacer software for traceability that they sell with their machines, but it can provide the validation and traceability if your equipment vendor cannot, if the machine is so old that it doesn't have that option available from the vendor. So that's something we can always talk about as well through our what we call our track, trace, and control suite of applications.